Hi all, and welcome to this next tutorial where I'm going to paint the skulltaker. In this tutorial series I will focus on the skin and his face and the sword and some flames. I'm also going to paint some black on his horns as well. And first off, I'm going to base coat the model in a blue dark tone with dark sea blue and black. It's going to go well with our reds. Now I'm going to paint out all the muscles of his leg. We're gonna focus on the leg here, since it would take too much time to show everything, and that would be quite boring. But it's basically the same principle with all the details. So we're gonna focus on all these muscles and leave the recessed parts in darker tones. So we're not going to paint those in red. And this will create a nice base for our next step, that will be glazing. Next up, we're going to take some deep red and glaze over our reds and blacks. This is going to bind the paints together a bit more, sort of soften them up. So what we're going for here in total is a sort of a magical fiery effect on our skin, as you can see on the other leg that I already painted. In the whole process, you might get some question marks of this doesn't look so good, or this is not going to look like the end result, but trust me, it will, because the whole process is going to look kind of shitty in each and every step until the end. In the end, there's going to grow out more, and the flesh is going to start acting more magical. Sort of when you're painting non-metallic metals, it doesn't look very non-metallic until the end, when you put on the light and dark reflections, the most extreme shades and highlights. That's when you get the real end results. So just paint this on. You don't have to be too careful here. You just want to cover the reds and blacks, so you get the red a different shade of color, and the black is going to turn a little bit more reddish dark. So this sort of softens them up and makes a nice blend. So it saves you a lot of time to do it like this, instead of just shading it down by hand. You just do a nice thin overlay of deep red instead. So next up, we're going to take some Aldebaran red, and we're going to paint out all our muscles again, sort of glazing them up. And we already have that base of reds, so this is not going to be too hard to do. It's going to be a nice coverage of the Aldebaran red here. I of course always use a little bit of glaze in these steps, except the first one, but I wanted a really great contrast there. So, but But yeah, just keep working up all the muscles and glaze the highlights away from the shadows or to the edge of the muscles. You can see that I highlight into a connection of a recessed part sometimes, but that's where the end of the muscle is. So just follow the curvature of the muscles and most of the time glaze away from the darker areas. So now we're gonna start build up the highlights of the skin and do a nice little layer of the near yellow and amaranth red. This is gonna look very orange, that's because it is, but also a little bit more at the flesh way as well. So you can see that it isn't too intense of an orange I'm mixing up here. A little bit of that fleshy feeling as well. And with this I'm going to create a nice base for our next glaze that's going to be after this layer and the next layer of highlights. So this is sort of prepping the model for a blending once again. So you don't have to be too careful here with all your paints, but still make a decent transition between them on the larger areas. Otherwise just paint the straightest lines you can on curves and muscles, as you can see that I'm doing here. I'm now gonna take pure Tenier yellow and paint out fine lines of highlights onto the previously painted parts of the skin. And don't worry if they stick out of the model too much, being too contrasty from the rest of it, since we're going to glaze this down in our next step. Or if you like this sort of effect that is appearing here, you can actually stop after this step. It will actually be quite fine if you want to make more of a rank and file unit of these kind of effects. This will still be very time consuming, of course, if you are doing a 20-man unit with this type of skin. Then I would suggest just doing some simple steps, sort of a combination of what I am showing here. It's kind of difficult to make this into a quicker version, but I think it would work some way. I can look into that in the future. But yeah, you could stop here if you wanted a little bit of a quicker paint job, of course. But we're going for the next level. So next up, the glaze. So as we previously did at the start of this tutorial, we are going to do another glazed overlay, sort of just a thin cover of the older barn red. So this will give our back our reddish feeling to the skin. So because right now it's a little bit more yellow and orange, so we want to bring back some of that red into the skin. And also this will blend all our previously painted stages together to make them more smooth. So yeah, this is pretty easy. I would recommend that you are trying to stay away from the deepest shades of the model, but otherwise you can just go nuts with this. I pretty much cover basically everything except a few small darker places, but we are going to go in with a shade later on to intensify those places. And after the glaze has dried, I'm going back at it once again with the Tenier yellow, and I'm just gonna repaint the highlights that I did previously. Since we have a nice base of the previously painted Tenier yellow mixed with our glazed overlay, we now can make the really fine highlights with the pure Tenier yellow once more. And this will blend really nice, since the Tenier yellow sort of recognizes the previously painted Tenier yellow. So they are in the same color tone, or how to explain it. It's kind of hard, but you can see here what I'm doing. So be more careful with this step than the previously painted highlight step we did with Tenier yellow, because this we will not glaze over. This is going to be final for this highlight, and after this I am going to do a shade, I believe, and then there's going to be some more highlighting. Next up, we're going to do a really thin down glaze shade for our recessed areas to give that dark coal feeling to the burning skin. And I'm going to use dark sea blue and black for this. Same mix I used for the base coat of the model when I airbrushed it. So this, remember to have a really thin glaze here, barely visible when you are painting it on, because it's really intense with black and blue onto red. So you don't need a lot of paint to make a difference. And all the recessed parts, and paint away from the red curves. Pretty much the same as you did with the highlights before, except that those were painted away from the darker shadows. So blend them apart from each other. Now you can see that the paint's really thin here, but it's still giving a great showing on our miniature. So later on I'm also gonna paint all the little knobs on his skin to give a little bit of a burnt coal effect on those as well. Make a nice little texture. Make them a part of the mini, so I won't forget those. So now we're going to do the last step, take some ice yellow, and this we're going to paint onto the highest, most exposed parts of the mini at the end of the highlights, if you could say it like that. So the dark that we did previously is going to bring forth the ice yellow quite nicely. Makes a really great contrast between those two. And this is what's going to give the skin the glowy burning effect. Well, we can't really call it burning because burning would be really intense, but you get the idea. It's quite sharp and fiery. So at the edges of all the highlights, and really carefully making all the small dots. I'm sort of still pushing the paint away from the darker areas to get that little transition between the highlight and the dark. Because if you just push the paint on without making a little brush stroke, it will look like a stain instead of a smooth transition. So if you see how I work my brush, the brush is even at the tiniest areas, it's pushing the paint a little bit. On some parts I will just make small dots, but that's because they are really tiny. But otherwise I always try to push the paint to make those transitions. You can see now how the contrast of the skin really shows, and how the black works up the effect with the ice yellow. And when all the other details comes on and all the skin is painted, as you're going to see later with the other tutorials that's coming next after this one, you are going to see how everything comes together and creates the effect as a whole. So even if you don't think that, oh, this is not looking so bright and sharp on this little foot I just painted here, don't worry, paint all the skin and you will see how everything combines together to create that effect. So as I mentioned before in this tutorial, is that many things may look shitty until the end, when the final touches comes on, and then you will see the final result of your work. So everything demands a little bit of planning and some risk taking as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of the skin painting, and I'll see you in the next one, that is the face painting. It's basically the same, except facial features are acting a little bit different from the body, and also there are other things to keep in mind when painting a face this way. So I thought it would be good to show you both the skin and the face. And also we're going to do some cool eyes on the face as well, so you don't want to miss that. But yeah, keep practicing. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.